Imagine waking up in Phoenix, turning on your faucet, and realizing the most important river in the American Southwest just is no longer there for you. This isn't science fiction. This is right now. The federal government is quietly preparing a decision that could cut Arizona's portion of the Colorado River water deeper than any state in the country. In some scenarios, cutting deliveries through the CAP project by more than half, even pushing towards catastrophic levels, could reshape how entire cities survive. And here's the part that nobody wants to say out loud: this pain's not going to be shared equally. The current administration seems bent on making certain that the upper basin states share none of the pain. That means that ours, the lower basin states, are going to have to suffer more. Now, Phoenix has purchased water farms, giving it real buffers. Scottsdale, it's more exposed. They're actually talking about closing car washes and golf courses. In Cave Creek, they're 95% dependent upon the CAP water, almost entirely dependent. You see, this isn't just about water policy. It's about whether growth in the desert was a miracle, just a mirage. It's about how leadership and nonpartisanship in our past built Arizona's water policies. While today, politicians point fingers and campaigns weaponize the crisis. Washington and Congressman Biggs, they blame Governor Hobbs. In the states, well, they're blaming each other. While Governor Hobbs, she likes to talk about how she vetoes a lot of bills, but when it comes to consensus, well, not so much. The clock is ticking towards a federal decision that could lock in a darker Arizona future for a generation. So tonight, we're not going to talk theory. We're talking about survival, leverage, politics, and whether Arizona has the leadership to fight for a fair deal and the courage to build a new water future. That includes groundwater recharge and desalination, water recycling, whether we can get politicians to point their guns outward as opposed to inwards. The point only being made today by the independent running for governor, Hugh Lytle. And there's no one better to walk us through the reality of all this than literally the man who is at the center of it. Terry Goddard today is the chairman of the Central Arizona Water Conservation District. He was mayor of the city of Phoenix, one of the most exalted positions in Arizona. I know because I once held it too. But he also was attorney general. He has a long history in public policy. And literally, there are very few people in Arizona who know as much about water policy as him. Now, I'm just an ordinary, optimistic American who really believes that the United States is a great cause for good. But being an optimist doesn't mean that we ignore the downsides or the risks. So today, we're going to talk about Arizona's water future.
Destiny. Destiny. You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. 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 You and I have a rendezvous with destiny.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
All right, so this is like actually bringing back together an old group. A long time ago, all of us were working one way or another with one another. Terry Goddard, who now is the head of the CAWCD, he used to be the mayor of Phoenix. When I was on the council, I later succeeded him as mayor. And at that time, we had Bob Robb as our lobbyist for a little while, but then he became a columnist at the Arizona Republican, started beating up on us for being too liberal on stuff, as I recall. But Bob, we love what you're writing, love things that you're doing. People can find you on Substack. Where are you today? Are you in Phoenix?
I am in Phoenix. Temperature is great. Soon to be a different
Yeah, it's getting
story.
hotter. Definitely. Yeah, we'll both be up on Munns Park as quick as we can be. Terry, you have a cabin too. At least you used to back when you were mayor. I remember you always going up there and painting the deck and that type of thing.
Yeah,
You- you-
many years ago, I had a place on Mount Lemon, but it burned in the Aspen fire in 2007. So it's been a while since I've had a retreat of any kind.
Just a moment ago, I did an introduction of you, Terry, and I was using pictures of you, one from being mayor of Phoenix and one from being attorney general and now the CAWCD. And one thing I noticed as I was going through those is that both of us are getting a little older. I guess it happens.
And probably not you, but you have a lot less hair.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in because I think this is a fascinating discussion on the issue of water. And let me just start with this. I was in a book club the other day, and in the book club, we started having a discussion about the issue of how oftentimes these New York publications will have these descriptions about Phoenix that basically say Phoenix shouldn't exist. Right? We'll see it in the New York Times, and we'll see it in the Atlantic and a variety of other papers. Well, where they'll come out and talk about the heat or terrible development or whatever it is that they have going on for us, all the while usually ignoring their own shortfalls. But it oftentimes is designed to hurt us. The question I guess I'm asking is, or I want to start by asking is, this time it seems a little bit different. The water issue is a real issue. Now, it's partly because of the drought. It's partly because of politics. There's a whole series of other issues that are related to it. But Terry, I'm hoping that you can kind of lay the groundwork for us up front as to what the problem is and why it exists and what challenges that we're going to have to deal with.
Well, Paul, the challenge is nothing new. Phoenix, Arizona is a desert, and we have a very low rainfall on a per capita basis. And the New York Times and others, there was a book that I remember debating the author of, who basically said that we were the least sustainable city, Phoenix was, in the nation, in the world, because we use more water than fell from the sky each year. And one of the things I pointed out to him in that debate was, so does every major city throughout civilization that has existed in an area of irrigation, of dams and rivers. And that goes back to the civilization of Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, the Nile, of course. And those were all low rainfall areas, but they prospered because they had incredible public works. They had the dams and the canals that allowed them to have crops in the desert. And somehow some of these columnists have just refused to accept the fact that most of civilization, most of the advancements of civilizations have taken place in the deserts, in areas of low rainfall, because you have to have massive public works in order to survive there. But what's happening today, I like to call myself sort of in the spirit of Paul Revere, not of Chicken Little. We've got a serious problem. And I think Arizona and the community that you just referred to, Paul, the development community, have been in denial. They basically have not wanted to scare any of their investors from New York and other places. And so they're saying, and have said through today, that, oh, we've got plenty of water. It's there in Arizona. And don't worry about it. Well, we do need to worry about it. Colorado is at historic low levels. The lakes are not dry yet, but they're close to what they refer to as dead pool, which is an ominous thing to say. And we have to have emergency measures in order to get through this particular crisis, which is we're at the end of a 26-year drought, or we're in a drought that has lasted for 26 years. Started in 2000. It's still going on today. And in fact, the worst year we've had is this year.
We hope it's the end.
Well, I misstated. We have no evidence that it's the end, but we do know that this year is the worst year on record. Last year, which was a bad year, we had almost average rainfall in the Rocky Mountains, which is where the Colorado River is birthed, and that's where we get our water supply. And yet the amount of water getting into Lake Powell, which is the beginning of the reservoir system, was 49% of average. So 98% of average in terms of snowfall, 49% in terms of inflow. So you can see right away there's a big problem. We're not living up to the historic levels that we had in the lake system, in the basin. And so this is a year of true emergency. But we're also in the process of negotiating a new 20-year agreement between the 7 basin states. The last one to be put in place expires this year. So in October 2027, there has to be a new agreement, either by agreement among the states or by imposition by the Federal Bureau of Reclamation. So we're in trouble, and we need to find some ways out of this, both short term and long term. And they're going to. Arizona's always been known for long term water management. We've done a good job, starting with the Salt River Project, and then the Central Arizona Project, and then the groundwater management statutes. We've looked ahead. We've tried to see what our problems were before they happened. But in the last few years, we haven't. We've sort of shunned that long range view, and we've taken a very short range view, and leading to a very unfortunate action by the home builders just recently, where they took on the Groundwater Management Code, which is one of Arizona's singular lifelines for water security. But I should stop there and let Bob weigh in, and I think we'll have a lot more to talk about.
One of my questions in terms of the negotiation between the states that draw from the Colorado River is who decides for Arizona? You have the governor, you've got the director of water resources, you've got the Central Arizona Conservation District, which you head up. You have the Arizona legislature. So I know the prospects of an agreement right now are pretty dim. There's a feeling that the Bureau is going to have to step in and make a unilateral decision. But if there were to be an agreement, how does the domestic process work here in Arizona for Arizona to say yes?
Well, it won't surprise you that Arizona is unique. We tend to be in many ways. We're the only state among the 7 that requires legislative approval for any change in our water entitlements or our water future. And so the legislature is going to have to be involved. The negotiators around the table, the 7 state negotiators, are all governor's representatives. So Tom Brashatsky, the head of the Department of Water Resources, is the negotiator for the state of Arizona. We at CAP are on his right hand. We provide a lot of the technical expertise that, the DWR does not have. And hopefully we're a very positive partner in trying to make sure that Arizona puts its best foot forward in this very important determination as to what we're going to do from the Colorado River, which, just to put things in perspective, the Colorado River is about 1/3 of the supply for all of Arizona. Depending on what city you live in, it can be as much as 90 to 100% of the water that your city gets. Other cities are a lower percentage if they've got a big Salt River project involvement. But I think it's fair to say that the CAP has been critical to the growth of the Arizona economy ever since 1985, which is the first year that we started getting water from the Colorado River.
One more process question in terms of who has the authority. Arizona perceives that its leverage is filing a lawsuit requiring the delivery of a promised amount of water at a certain point at Lee's Ferry, if I recall correctly. Who would have standing and authority to file such a lawsuit among that same cast of characters?
A lot of people. The state of Arizona obviously has primary authority, and they can go directly to the Supreme Court, as happened back in 1952 when Arizona sued California in the Supreme Court over essentially its entitlement under the Colorado Compact. We won that case in 1962. It was a 10-year piece of litigation, which gives you an idea of what Supreme Court jurisprudence is all about. Not unreasonable today to have that kind of a delay, which is one of the reasons we're very wary of jumping into litigation. But it may be necessary. The history of the current negotiations show that the 4 upper basin states, and by that I mean Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, and New Mexico, have basically hung together through all the 3 years of discussions and have refused to give up 1 gallon of water in times of urgent necessity, in times of super drought, to the benefit of the lower basin. And we believe that's both unfair and contrary to the Colorado Compact, which, as you mentioned, Bob, requires that 1.5 million acre, 7.5 million acre feet of water on average every year be released from the upper basin to the lower basin at Lee's Ferry.
So when the compact was drawn, that the what Bob was talking about, what you're talking about, was that there was an agreement between us when we agreed to be last in priority, where we thought that we had a guarantee from the upper basin states that a certain amount of water would flow into the river at the point of Lee's Ferry. My question is, help us understand what's going on between the upper basin states and lower basin states. And then when we get done with that, we'll talk a little bit about the differences between the lower basin states.
Okay. Actually, Paul, there are two events that you're referring to, and you meshed them together. 1922, 7 basin state representatives under the leadership of an insignificant American called Herbert Hoover. You know, he was just wanting to have a damn name for him. They basically got together for most of the year of 1922 to negotiate how to divide the river between the 7 states that have some proximity to the Colorado River. Arizona, I could argue, and they did then, has the most proximity to the Colorado River, given that it's our state border with California. But that agreement was reached, and it had the agreements that I referred to earlier, that 7.5 or an average of 7.5. The Colorado Compact actually says that 75 million acre feet were released by the upper basin to the lower basin every 10 years. So you have to extrapolate to get the annual. And then a few years later, in 1944, 45, the United States entered a treaty with Mexico, which provided an additional 1.5 million acre feet would be supplied to the country of Mexico. And that has been done ever since that agreement was forged. Now, in 1968, Arizona went to Congress. They've been there for quite a long time, fighting for something called the Central Arizona Project, which would be an effort to get Arizona's stipulated amount, 2.8 million acre feet of water from the Colorado River, to get a portion of that into where the population and the economy was, and that's Central Arizona. So finally in 68, the CAP was passed, it was funded. Lyndon Johnson signed the bill, but there was a negotiation element, which was in order to get California on board, Arizona had to agree that in times of shortage, California would get its whole 4.4 million, even if it meant that Arizona lost the portion that went to the CAP, which was the lowest priority vis-a-vis California. Now, I say that carefully because right now we're in a debate with the upper basin. The CAP agreement has nothing to do with the upper basin. The Colorado Compact still guarantees that we get 7.5 million acre feet per year. And we intend to stand on that legal principle. But I think that gets to your next question, which is, okay, how do we determine between the lower basin states who gets what?
Yes, go ahead and answer that one.
Oh, that's harder. Right now, having fought with California through my life, I grew up at a supper table where California was the enemy, and we were constantly reinforced in that belief. My dad was heavily involved in the early lobbying for the Central Arizona Project as governor. And that all has changed. Although California has some rights, some of them questionable under various interpretations of the statute, but they do have some agreements that say that they could be held harmless, but they've taken a much more constructive view in the last several years, which is that we're in this together. We have very similar economies between Southern California and Arizona. We're united by one river. And so they've agreed to take a fairly significant hit, 10% of their total allocation, if the water gets scarce. And the new agreement, which was just finalized Friday of this week, back, the 2nd of May, 1st of May, was that when we couldn't get an agreement with the all 7 states, we got the 3 states together, Nevada, California, and Arizona, to come up with an interim solution, or at least interim Band-Aid, actually, something that will get us through the next 2 years and not run out of water. So a big part of that is major cuts in both Arizona, California, and Nevada, and Mexico, and a big help from the Bureau of Reclamation in terms of buying enough water to keep us solvent in Lake Mead.
All right. So the Bureau, I think part of the argument has been that the Bureau of Reclamation has not been willing to push the upper basin states at all. Can you help me understand kind of what their argument is on that and why it is that they believe the upper basin states shouldn't participate?
Well, that may be changing. The Secretary of Interior took a very strong position just recently saying that the upper basin units, which were funded, they're above Lake Powell, some as far north as Wyoming, that they would have to produce 1 million acre feet in order to keep Lake Powell from going down to dead pool. That was an aggressive position. It's one we fully support and we believe is consistent with the law that set up those original units. They were funded with the express provision that they would allow the upper basin enough water to be able to service its obligations under the Colorado Compact. So I don't think there's a big legal problem there, but it took them a long time to get to that action point. I mean, Lake Powell is in jeopardy of having the water drop below the intakes for the turbines. And if that happens, the flow through the dam becomes much less and the hydropower becomes non-existent. So these are pretty dire consequences that have forced the Department of Interior to start using its other water supplies. The upper units in total have almost 4 million acre feet of water today, and Lake Powell is almost, for all intents and purposes, going dry, as is Lake Mead. So we've got the big reservoirs right at the lowest possible level, and there's still significant resources in the upper basin, which the Secretary has now said he is going to have released.
So what do you think Arizona needs or continues to need from the Bureau of Reclamation? Where do we hope they go?
Well, we put a proposal on the table, and it's got about 6 points in it, and they're mutually dependent points. In other words, you can't pick and choose. But what we basically said, you've got to continue pulling water out of the upper basin as long as we're in this crisis. And we have specific levels in the lakes that are called the trigger points for when that has to be done. And we're just about there, I can tell you. It asks the Bureau to provide, and the funding is there. It was done under the Inflation Reduction Act back in the Biden administration. There is specific allocation of substantial money specifically for the arid Southwest. And we believe that some, if not all of that money, should be used to alleviate this crisis. And there are two ways to do it. One is to pay certain farmers not to plant in a particular year so that the water that would have gone to crops will end up going to Lake Mead. That's expensive, but it's one way to provide additional water. And the other is there's some long overdue improvements to the system. Lake Powell itself, behind Glen Canyon Dam, is unfortunately an engineering disaster right now. I mentioned that you can't withdraw below the intakes for the turbines. One of the reasons for that is they have bypass tubes, which are down below the turbine intakes. But they found out when they started using those, A, they're much lower capacity than the turbine intakes. And second, they actually were undermining the dam. A bit of an engineering problem and one that should be worked on right now. And we're urging the Bureau of Reclamation to do that, but they haven't. So let's put some of that inflation reduction money into fixing Glen Canyon Dam. In addition, there's over 150,000 acre feet of water each year that goes to Mexico. It's not every year, but on average, over the past 10 years, there's been a very substantial flow between 100 and 150,000 acre feet, which has gone to Mexico over and above the requirements of the treaty. And we believe that that could be, if not stopped, at least significantly cut down for the benefit of the lower basin. And again, Interior hasn't moved off the dime in doing that. We need more area for storage in the lower basin, and we probably need some desalting efforts that come out of mothballs and to start being used so that the water we do send to Mexico meets the treaty obligation.
Is there downstream help we may be able to get from Mexico in terms of taking less water or looking for other alternatives for them?
Well, yes, we've been working with Mexico from the get go. The Boundary Commission has been an active participant in these discussions, and they've been a good partner. Every time there's been a cut in the lower basin, Mexico has taken a per capita share. So I have no complaints in terms of our cooperation and our partnership with the country of Mexico. Basically, as you know, the water that gets to Mexico basically serves agricultural needs as far west as Tijuana.
Yeah, there's been some discussion of Arizona basically purchasing some of San Diego's um, Colorado River entitlement, and San Diego increased reliance on desalination. Could these federal funds be used for that purpose? Would there be a basis for Arizona to claim to ask the federal government to pay for that?
Essentially, the agreement that's on the table today basically asks the Bureau of Reclamation to fix it. We don't stipulate how they should fix it, but you're right. One of the proposals that's on the state, it has some very technical legal consequences that haven't been resolved. So getting water from California, I think, is part of our future, but I can't give you a clear path to how that's going to happen. Cost is a big item, and I'm sure Interior will try to find the least expensive water they can. And as soon as you start talking desal, you're talking $3,000 an acre foot. Today, CAP water is delivered to the municipalities. We don't deliver to farmers, but it's delivered to industry and citizens in central Arizona for around $300 an acre foot. So you can see there's a massive change in the future in terms of what water will cost to the ultimate user. And I think that's one of the things that Arizona has been very slow to recognize. I'm not going to say we jumped to $3,000 immediately, but that's what the high end is right now. And I'm sure there are going to be some commercial entities that step in at a lower price than that. But that remains to be determined. And now we have the Arizona legislature to deal with. Because throughout our history, ever since Paul and I were active with the city of Phoenix, the legislature has been anti-urban. The majority there has taken a position that water in the rural parts of Arizona should stay there. And so when Phoenix stepped forward and bought the McClellan Valley, basically the legislature came in and said, never again, we're not going to allow that. And then later, when parts of Mojave County agreed to take surface water from the Colorado River and transfer some of their allocation to Queen Creek, the legislature once again stepped in. Okay, you did it once, but we're not going to allow you to do it again. So the whole idea that we need to find new sources of water within our state are constantly being stopped by the Arizona legislature.
So, in terms of groundwater or being able to exchange water rights, that's one issue. Help me understand what really happened on groundwater recharge. Why are the upper basin states opposed to us doing groundwater recharge? And what is groundwater recharge?
Well, okay, the upper basin states have taken position that nothing that we do is right. And I say that with a bit of a smile, but that really has been their position for the last 3 years. They basically say that Arizona specifically and Southern California, sort of by derivation, are wastrels. We're profligates. We are doing nothing but wasting water for the pure joy of wasting it. And that does not pay any attention to the facts. We use less water in Arizona today with a population 5 times larger than we did in 1950. Now, part of that has been agriculture has gone out of production and it's become houses, but basically we're much more water efficient than any other part of the country. We do a better job of reclaiming. Nevada is probably the champion, but we're right behind them in terms of using water over and over and over again. And what Phoenix is doing today in terms of purification of their sewage water is groundbreaking and very, very aggressive and very appropriate for a desert community. So we're doing everything that we should be doing, but the upper basin doesn't believe it, and they're constantly berating us as being wasters. They point out the 200 golf courses that are in the central Arizona area. They point out a little thing called Fountain Hills, where Sheriff Joe lives, that keeps pumping water into the air And I don't think much of it comes back down, but that's one of the things they love telling us. And what they don't want to hear is that we have been A, very prudent. B, we've got a tough groundwater management code passed in 1980, which has meant that in the urban areas, for every gallon that you pump out of the earth, within 2 years, you have to put it back. And that's the recharge that you're talking about. Basically, we use ground settlement basins throughout the valley where water is put to seep back into the aquifer, back into the groundwater supply. And we've stored that way over the past 30 years, almost 40 years, close to 10 million acre feet underground using any excess water that we could find so that we have it in a dry day, not a rainy day, but a dry day. So that's one of that's why I'm Paul Revere, not Chicken Little. We've planned, we've been careful, we've husbanded the supplies that we have, but we're still not ready to take that groundwater back out. That needs some expensive utilities,
Infrastructure.
it needs some piping and some pumping. Is not ready. Infrastructure, yeah, the sleep-inducing word for most people, but it's something that is desperately needed, and it takes a while to implement. And so that's why we're talking about these very short-term provisions to get through at least the next couple of serious drought years. But in that time, Arizona better wake up to the fact that it should have long before now, that we are in a desert. We need to save every drop that we can, and we need to find ways to reclaim, to recover the water that we have stored underground.
Help people understand the Groundwater Management Act, how it helped, and what might have happened had it not been in place.
Well, I happen to be there in Congress as an observer when they were debating the Central Arizona Project. And one of the major points that was shown to the congressman, to the Committee on Interior, was the incredible subsidence, mostly in Pinal and Pima counties, but it looked like earthquakes, where you saw where the earth had just sunk down because of the large amounts of groundwater that had been taken out for ag purposes mostly. And that was very compelling when the CAP was being debated, because Tucson was the largest city in the world that relied entirely on groundwater. And so the CAP came and alleviated that. It brought water to southern Arizona and to central Arizona, and that allowed us to stop drawing down the groundwater. It was the CAP that did that. It was the CAP that provided that extra crutch that meant that in conformance with the 1980 Groundwater Act, you could have development and you could still be able to say, I've got a 100-year supply. I'm going to put every drop that I take out of the ground is going to go back in within a reasonable period of time. That's what the Groundwater Management Act has required. And it's one of the things that I say with great pride when people are critical of Arizona. We basically say, show me in New York where your 100-year water plan is. And the answer is they don't have one. No other state has one, but we do. And it's one of the reasons why I think we can say Arizona economy is going to survive, because we've been careful over the past 40 years.
All right, so the Bureau of Reclamation, as I understand it, somewhere in June or July, has to make a decision for what the allocation is going to be in January. Scottsdale just did a report that came up with pretty draconian effects if they end up having a 77% cut to their groundwater that I think they're about 80% dependent upon. That included the closing of their car washes, the closing of golf courses, parks, stop issuing development permits. I've met with the city of Phoenix. City of Phoenix, I think, largely because of the planning that we've been doing over the years, isn't nearly in as bad a shape. They've got enough groundwater credits that they think that they can make it for about 7, 8, 9 years before it starts to become more of a problem. But give me your prediction or possibilities. What are the possibilities for draconian actions having to be taken, like Scottsdale's pointing out, in January?
Well, the first answer to that is that I believe, and unfortunately, your question is the right question, some of your facts are a little skewed. For instance, the water year ends on the 1st of October. So we don't get till January to get this stuff straightened out. And Scottsdale is one city, an important city, that takes a very significant amount of its total water from the Central Arizona Project. Scottsdale, as you just mentioned, is about 70%. Phoenix, it's about 30%. So it depends on where you live and what other sources of water your city has been working on developing over the years as to exactly how you're going to be impacted. But draconian is the right word. I mean, we need to take the long-term plans right now so that regardless of how carefully the planning has been done, I think your question has the hanging there at the end is this idea that if we don't have some relief, we could run out completely. And that's what I hope people will realize out of this discussion and others that are going on right now, which is we don't have a magic bullet here. All we can do is save water, make sure we purify the water we have, find ways to get as much as we possibly can from other sources. And the Bureau of Reclamation, I believe, has an obligation, legal and moral, to help us do that. They haven't stepped up yet, but I think they may as we get closer and closer to this deadline. But it's a may, it's not a will. And I think we're all waiting to see what their decision will be. We put, I think, a very responsible position forward as lower basin states, one that will get us through 2 years, but it doesn't guarantee the future for the next 20, which is what we were trying to do when we started these discussions. And if you want me to, I'd be happy to go through some of the different areas that we could find additional water. But none of them are immediate. Everyone requires investment. Everyone requires patience and sometimes significant legal changes.
Yeah, give me, if you would, break that up into both short-term solutions to get us through to the long-term solutions, and then what the longer-term, more expensive solutions might be.
Okay, it's not going to be a complete compendium, but I think I can give you a thought, an idea. Salt River Project's working on raising Bartlett Dam. If they do raise Bartlett Dam, it provides a reliable 100,000 additional acre feet to some downstream users. We can put that water into the Central Arizona Project with a few legal hurdles taken care of first. And that could be distributed anywhere in the state of Arizona. That's a start. But that's a 10-year, a number of environmental impact statements and a lot of money to get us to the Bartlett Dam solution. We have the Salt River CAP interchange, which is being discussed. It could provide as a reliable 25,000 acre feet a year in some good years in the Salt River Project watershed. And fortunately, they've been in a good time when Colorado River has been in a bad time. So they're not quite countercyclical, but they're close. So we might be able to have that interchange between SRP and CAP in the future. Right now, you can take CAP water into the Salt River canals, but you can't go the other way. And when you have a big year out of Lake Roosevelt, for example, it would be very helpful to be able to take advantage of that. The last few big floods, we haven't been able to grab any of it. You've got the groundwater that we talked about earlier. There are only 3 groundwater basins that the legislature has allowed to be available for transportation from the agricultural rural area into the urban area. And those are Harquahala, Butler, and McMullen. Well, Harquahala is pretty well taken care of. The cities and other interests have pretty much tied up every drop of water under the Harquahala Valley. But we're not ready to get it yet. It's got certain pollution problems that have to be remediated before it can be put in the CAP canal. That's again 5, maybe 6, 7 years away. Part of Scottsdale's solution is water from the Harquahala. But we haven't solved the problem of drilling to get it out, a transportation corridor, a pipeline to get it to the canal, and to meet the very stringent water quality standards that we have before it can be put in the CAP canal. That's to protect all the users. So those are a couple of the examples. We talked a little bit about working with the ag areas so that they would have, in years of maximum distress, they would be paid to fallow some of their crops. It's a bad word in the ag area. but it's one that has been used, I think, very constructively in California, where the city of Los Angeles, for example, has some agreements with various irrigation districts that will allow for just exactly that. They've agreed in long term negotiation as to what the price would be and what the trigger points would be. And that has been beneficial for both sides. It gives security to Los Angeles and it gives a pretty good stream of income to the ag areas. We have not done that in Arizona. It hasn't even been started, that discussion. And it must be. In other words, if we have 2 years, if for example, Interior buys the Lower Basin proposal that's been put on the table last week, please, let's not waste it. I mean, this is the time to have serious discussions between the urban areas who today get 25% of the total water supply in the state and the ag areas who get 75%. That's not a particularly reasonable allocation. I think we can work it out, but somebody's got to sit down and start talking about it, and they haven't been doing it.
How long, if your allocation happens with the Bureau of Reclamation, the proposal that you put on the table, how many years do you think that gives us to come up with this medium term solutions? Most of the things you're talking about seem to me to be medium term, that there's still a long term problem that we may have to address.
Well, I'm a history buff, as you know. When the CAP was passed in 1968, I was reading the newspaper articles that came along with it. And of course, there was a lot of jubilation in Arizona that basically said, finally, we've got the potential of getting the water, the renewable water supply to central Arizona that will allow us to expand beyond the borders of the Salt River Project. And that was a huge economic boost for all of Arizona. $2 trillion is the way we estimate the benefits that came as a result of that new water supply. So it was a big deal. And down in the bottom of the article about this great triumph, the chairman of the Interior and Insular Affairs Committee in the House of Representatives says, oh, and by the way, we want the Basin states to take on the burden of approximately 2.5 million acre feet of water that's not going to be provided by the CAP. And we believe it's a deficiency in the basin. And that will just buy us the time for Congress to come in and do it. So there in 1968, they recognized that there was 2.5 million acre feet that they had to find somewhere else to bring into this basin in order to continue the momentum that the CAP had created. They never did it. So that was a promise in 1968 that's never been realized. And I think you're basically right that without some external supplies, and I remember Governor Ducey talked about having a desal plant in Mexico. Now, I don't think that's a particularly viable option, but it's one that we ought to be looking at. CAP has been looking at it for years to see what the dynamics would be, but it doesn't solve the problem. It would be a $5 to $10 billion investment for 200,000 acre feet of water. 200,000 is a lot, but it's no means close to the amount that we will need if we're going to get even close to where we used to be in terms of water supply for central Arizona. We were reliably supporting, since 1985, 1.5 million acre feet of water to central Arizona. In the last couple of years, it's only been 1 million acre feet because we took cuts as we had to in order to keep Lake Mead from cratering. And we did a huge part in keeping that from happening much earlier than it's now. But and today we're saying we could take as much as, in this proposal, 760,000 acre feet out of the Central Arizona Project system. That takes it to approximately half of its capacity. Anything below that, I think, would be very seriously debilitating to cities in central and southern Arizona. Tucson, for example, gets 100% of its water from the CAP system. Now, I don't want to be too doctrinaire about that. Tucson's done a terrific job of long-term planning, and they've got at least a 10-year cushion, but they still are very dependent upon this source of water. So we've got to find that or a reasonable alternative, and we're going to need federal help to get that, and we're going to need aggressive legislative and gubernatorial action to take the 2 years that we may be given by this interim solution that's on the table today and make the most of it.
To what extent can additional purchases from the Indian tribes or forbearance from from taking CAP allocation by the tribes play? That wasn't on your continuum. That was a central part of what we've done to cope to date. Is there much additional capacity in that area to help alleviate the shortage problem?
Well, first, let's not think about the Indian tribes, the tribal nations, as being a unitary entity. They are by no means. I mean, CAP has 11 tribal nations that receive some CAP water. Other tribes, Kashan and Crit in particular, get their water directly from the Colorado River, so they're not part of the CAP system. So there's some very distinct differences there. The CAP related tribes, of course, if CAP is cut, they're going to be cut too. It's still to be determined whether it's on a proportional basis or whether they have a priority. I mean, that's the kind of thing that Interior is balancing today. But yes, there's been a significant amount of work between the cities in particular and the Gila River Indian community, who is basically the largest water user, provider, occupier of Central Arizona. So they're the big entity in this fight, but there are many others. Tohono O'odham in Southern Arizona has a big allocation that is all funded from the Central Arizona Project. Some of it is backed up by federal guarantees. So we're not quite sure where that one is going today, but they have some pretty secure water rights as well. So some of the long-term solution, if we can get the water in the canal, it will go to tribes, and tribes will then decide whether they're going to use it for agriculture or for bailing out cities, and it will cost the cities to do that. So that is another one, and that's a far more immediate solution, as you're right, Bob. That's more immediate than all the infrastructure ones that I just described a few minutes ago.
Okay, so Terry, here's a question that I would have. Over the years, Arizona has really had some wonderful leadership, all the way back to Carl Hayden, who made water his focus coming out of the Verde Valley, as well as water coming into the CAP. Barry Goldwater, John Kyle, during the years that you and I were in office, and sometime afterwards, was somebody that people would oftentimes go to and would focus a lot on water policy. I remember once he told me, you don't get elected by focusing on water policy, but I'm not sure that that's going to be true here in the upcoming future. I think that it increasingly is going to become more important. But my question to you is that leadership still there? Do we still have the ability with our political system being as divided as it is today for a variety of different reasons? Do we have the ability to come together on this one? And as they say, all politics should stop at the water's edge.
Yeah, they should. Yeah, they should. And Senator Kyle spoke to me several years ago, 10 years at least, with the following thought. Arizona started the Reclamation in the West program with the Salt River Project in 1912. Roosevelt Dam was commissioned. And that was the beginning of the prosperity of Central Arizona. That was the secure water supply that was so desperately needed, and the flood protection. Remember that? You probably don't. I don't either. But there used to be houses in Central Phoenix are built 3 feet off the ground because it used to flood every year. Roosevelt Dam stopped the floods, and it provided a reliable system. But it was all dependent upon where you lived. If you weren't in the Salt River Project area, you didn't get water because it was tied to their property. Literally, the old farmers mortgaged the ranch and the farm or whatever it was they had in order to build Roosevelt Dam. And they got commensurate property rights because of that. That's why the CAP was so important, because it came in 1985 and provided water for the areas that weren't part of the Salt River Project, and for Tucson and for Pinal County. And this was a state. You go back and read the early writings of Hayden, of Ashurst, of the Arizona leaders. It's all about water. It's all about, from the very beginning, why we have to scrimp and save. And of course, as you probably remember, maybe you weren't there, when the Arizona Navy went in and tried to start California from building the dam.
Missed that one.
You missed that one. I did too. That was in the 1930s. Bob was there. He was there. You had for a short time, you had the Arizona Navy But you're right. Politics should not be in the water discussion. It is far too important to our future. And for a long time, everybody supported the reelection of Carl Hayden because he was the one person who could get the CAP through the Congress. That wasn't quite true, but by the time it was passed, he was arguably the most powerful man in Washington, short of the president. He was president pro tem of the Senate. He was chairman of appropriations. Carl Hayden was just about everything. And he only had one goal, and that was to get Arizona water. Throughout his career, that's all he talked about. It's amazing. We don't have anybody like that today who has so clearly tied themselves to the water success. But the other part is that it's been bipartisan. I got to be, as I mentioned, in some of the hearings, or got to watch some of the hearings in 1966, 67, when the CAP was being debated. And we had two of the most extraordinary congressmen, I think, in history, Morris Udall and John Rhodes. And they worked together. There was a tall one and a short one, and a Democrat and a Republican. And they, I think, together produced the Central Arizona Project. Now, they had a little help. They had Hayden, of course. He was unmatchable. They had Stuart Udall, who was Secretary of Interior. They had folks that were on their side, but it was Mo and John that basically did the job. And it was because I think we've seen some analogies here in Arizona of two or three legislators who just excelled. And those two in the national frame excelled, and to our benefit, they really brought home the bacon. And it was because they put the party back home and they did it in Washington together as a team.
I've got a related question about the Bureau of Reclamation. To what extent do you perceive that the Bureau is approaching this in a technocratic basis, just the facts, ma'am? And to what extent do you think politics will come into play? And to the extent politics comes into play, what kind of hand do you think Arizona currently has?
Do I think politics will come into play? I guess it always does eventually. And we have two very blue states, one in the upper basin, one in the lower basin, that are not favored by this administration. Arizona, I think, all by itself would be. Our congressional Republicans have been very active. We were just back in Washington talking with them, and that I don't think there's one that has slacked off in trying to approach this administration about how devastating the proposals from the Bureau of the Department of Interior, Bureau of Reclamation, would be to Arizona and to the semiconductor industry and to the defense-related industries and to the incredible economy that has been built in the Phoenix area and in southern Arizona. So I think that's a resonating message with this administration. Hard to say exactly what, but we met with the secretary, and he basically, at the end of our discussion, said exactly what I've just said. You know, Arizona is too important to this country to let it go dry. But there are a whole lot of implementation steps that have to be fulfilled in order to make sure that that doesn't happen. And you've got an upper basin who's politically very powerful. I don't think there's any question that Senator Lee from Utah has a disproportionate amount of influence in Congress and with this administration. Senator Becerra from Wyoming is the chairman of one of the critical committees. No, I got it wrong, but he's a lot of seniority and a lot of importance in the decisions that are being made at Interior. So it's a very hard one to handicap. I wish we had Mo Udall and John Rhodes at the moment. We could certainly use their level of knowledge and bipartisan action because that's not that well-oiled a machine as that I got to see in 1966 today. And part of it's partisan. Part of it's nobody has the history that a Mo Udall or a Carl Hayden or a John Rhodes had with water policy. They were all raised in this, and there was nothing else that they thought was more important. And I don't think we see the same level of singularity going on in Congress. I don't think it's reasonable to expect it in Congress today, but we sure don't have it.
You know, it's Barry Goldwater. When we named the airport after him, he came in, he was in his wheelchair, and I just sat there and listened literally for 4 hours to him telling me stories, and I knew that he had served with Lyndon Johnson. Of course, I'm reminding him of the things that I knew on a surface level, like the Daisy ad and that type of thing. But in any event, he told me the story of he and Carl Hayden. He said that Carl Hayden came and got him one day and said, "Hey, we're going in to meet with Lyndon. I want you to go with me." So he and Carl go in, and Lyndon comes into the White House, and I guess Carl Hayden always smoked a big old stogie, and he had the stogie in his mouth, and he's not talking at all. Lyndon comes in. He says he's literally just filling the gap with talking away, and finally he says, "All right, Carl," he says, "now you're going to have to explain to me why in the hell I would ever vote for that CAP project you guys have." He said, he said, first, he says, Vegas hates it, and they got all the money. He says, California hates it, and they're the ones where I get all my votes. He said, it's probably going to cost almost $700 million to get it built. It cost $2 billion by the time it was done. And he said, and you're sitting next to the son of a bitch who's probably going to run against me. He says, now why in the hell would I ever think of vote for that? And Barry Goldwater says that Carl Hayden, for the first time, takes that big old stogie out of his mouth, flips the ash in his office, and says, "Well, why, Lyndon? Because you owe me." Barry Goldwater says that Lyndon turns over and looks at him and says, "I hate it. I hate it when he puts it that way." Right now, as funny as that story is, Carl Hayden, from the time he was literally out of college, his mom and dad offered him the ferry in Tempe, and he wrote this letter that Jack August, if you remember Jack August, the historian years ago, before he passed away, put it into his book. And in this letter, he said, "Mom, Dad," he said, I don't want the ferry. He said, "I think if I could go to Congress, we're going to become a state in the next couple of years." And he said, "And when we become a state," he said, "I'd like to be able to work on water projects to help Maricopa County grow." He became the longest serving senator until Strom Thurmond came about, and it gave him an immense amount of power. And I worry that that today that infrastructure not being there is problematic for us. My question that I would ask you is, and this is just a guess, I don't know this, but the EIN seemed very unfavorable for us, and it made me wonder whether the staff. I believe the following is true. There are a lot of people who believe that Phoenix shouldn't exist, especially a lot of the environmentalists and people who live on the East Coast. When I saw the EIN by the Bureau, it made me wonder if we don't actually have more opposition at the staff level and less at the political level. Maybe give me your thoughts on that. Dissuade me from that thought if that isn't true.
Well, you're right that they are very technological. That is true. Our CAP general manager is a former commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation. So we have a little bit of insight from Ben Berman, who is, basically lived with that bureau for 4 years and knows it very well. So there's fabulous people in the Bureau of Reclamation. But they are not necessarily ones who want to push the envelope. And right now, what's pushed them is they see that the dams, which are their very sacred responsibility, are in jeopardy. And so all of a sudden, they're looking at exercising legal authorities that in the EIS that you referred to, they basically said, we're not going to opine whether we have the authority, for example, to take water from the upper basin units. Now they're going to do it. So they've decided that the emergency requires them to act. But they were very hesitant. None of the upper basin units are described in terms of a water supply in the draft environmental impact statement. All of the options that were put forward by this administration are bad for Arizona. All of them. They didn't even put a placeholder in, which they fully intended to reject, which would have been the items that we suggested from the lower basin. That's not in that EIS at all. So yes, they did not take a favorable view to us. I can't speculate as to why. I do think they're technological. I think they wanted to stay as safe as they could, and they didn't take seriously the mandate of the Supreme Court in Arizona v. California, which basically says Department of Interior, and by that means the Bureau of Reclamation, are the river masters. They're the ones, when push comes to shove, who have the authority and the responsibility of caring for this river. And I think that's what they're finally waking up to today, and I hope they do it in time.
So when you were talking about Bartlett a moment ago, and the EIN process that they have to go through in a decade to build it, is there anything that we can do to shorten that process from a regulatory standpoint? The president seems to like executive orders. Maybe this might be a good one for an executive order to be placed on.
Interesting. I don't know. I don't know. It does have some environmental. It has some engineering efforts. I mean, Salt River is running all the trap lines. They're the leaders on this project, and I think they've got it well under control. But it's not fast. Building the raise to Bartlett is not going to happen quickly, and it would provide a significant amount of water. But I think the conservative estimate is in 10 years, and that's with everything going right. So yeah, they can help us. They can help with funding. They can help with perhaps shortening some of the regulatory procedures, but it's still going to take time. The interconnect with CAP, I think that's really important. That gives us one of the most dynamic interconnection water supplies in the world. Think of the size of that mutual system, and it's it's an incredibly fluid, useful. I think of it as a river in reverse. CAP, of course, moves water uphill, not downhill. So everybody else is an old-fashioned river. We're a modern river, uh, and we have shown our potential. And connected to Salt River system, I think that potential is infinitely magnified. But we need water to make it happen. And so we're the conservators and the deliverers of water, but we still have to work for the legal and the physical abilities to get hold of water that just isn't there today. If I could circle back to the original place where we started, what's happening in the Colorado River is the last time there was a series that we know about of this magnitude is 1,200 years ago.
Wow.
It's not a passing fad. It is a very serious long range problem. And the system is down 20%. But in years like the one we're in right now, today, the rainfall is so pathetic, the snowfall has been so marginal in the whole basin that the amount of water that's coming into Lake Powell is around 2 million acre feet. Remember, I said last year it was 4.8 or 4.9, and that was considered terrible. So this year is half of terrible, and that's even worse.
So what do you think the actual shortfall is? I've heard you say 1.5 million acre feet. And is do you see a plan that even exists to get us to that point? The last thing I would just have you fill in on that is the era of cheap water over?
It was actually over a long time ago, Paul, but I think we're beginning to recognize that it really doesn't exist anymore. I mean, the fallacy that water in the Central Arizona Project and in the Colorado River is provided for free. The only thing the users pay for is the cost of the capital to build the canal and the cost of the power to pump the water. So, really, water's free? I don't think so. I think in the future you'll have an economic benefit, economic value. This I'm playing to Robb on my, I guess on my left on the screen, but he's never been to my left before. Um, but it is probably going to be more of a market-driven water economy in the future, and I don't see how you can justify it any other way. To say that we're entitled to free water throughout this area for any economic use that you want to put it to is just not realistic.
So give us recommendations as to what you think our leadership needs to be doing right now and what you think the public needs to be doing right now to make certain that we're able to get through this crisis.
Okay, I'd start with don't sell your house. That's the Paul Revere versus Chicken Little. I mean, it's easy to say, oh, boom and doom, this is a terrible year, it's a terrible situation. I got to leave Arizona. And that would be wrong. I think that would be discounting all of the really good long range planning that Phoenix and other cities and the state have done over the years. We're really at the head of the class in terms of using water efficiently, and it's benefited us significantly, no question. But in the last few years, we haven't taken the long view. And I think that's the thing that I find so disturbing. And if we get some extra time this year, I'm very hopeful that we will do the kind of things we're talking about here today. We'll expedite some of these water conservation programs. We'll get the city of Phoenix water purification up and running. and Scottsdale's water purification program, which is one of the most advanced in the country. Um, we can get a serious discussion taking place between the municipal interests and the agricultural interests. That hasn't been done, but it can be started by the legislature and the governor, and this is time to do it. The actual time to do it was probably years ago, but don't let that stop you. That needs to happen because the that discussion is absolutely critical to our future. And so it's infrastructure, it's finance, it's sitting down across the table with reasonable people trying to find a solution. It's exactly what Governor Babbitt did in 1980. And I know Bob remembers some of that. That was when Burton Barr was the leader of our legislature and Alfredo Gutierrez. And basically, they had a problem. The federal government was not going to provide water through the CAP if Arizona continued to suck its groundwater aquifers dry. And so without passing a Groundwater Management Act, we were not going to get the CAP built. And they went to work. I believe the bill was passed unanimously in 3 days, something that we certainly look at with respect today. It was totally bipartisan, and it moved Arizona to the head of the class in terms of responsibly managing its groundwater. The reason they could do that was the promise of the surface water, the promise of the CAP. And that's the thing that's in jeopardy today. But we certainly shouldn't be scrapping the groundwater code. If anything, we should be expanding it so that we use our groundwater resources throughout the state responsibly.
You probably would not put it this way, but it does strike me that if you look at water holistically in Arizona, whatever the cuts we have to absorb from the Central Arizona project, and whatever augmentation or conservation efforts that we adopt, that ultimately the way that you reach balance is agriculture uses a lot less water. A portion of that gets transferred to the urban areas, but not all of it, and not enough to cover the shortage. That's the way ultimately within Arizona we achieve balance. But there's huge political and legal complications to that. Is that anything? We have all sorts of efforts, all sorts of activity going on. Is anyone working on those ideas, those concepts, if that's ultimately the only way we get to balance?
I can say that certain private sector interests are doing that. They've taken the look ahead and said that Arizona is going to be short of water, and we want to be there to provide it. So they've been negotiating, but right now one of their proposals is in the legislature, and my understanding is it's not a slam dunk. I think it has majority support, but I don't know where it's going. The fact that that is even a significant subject for debate is surprising to me, because I think you're right. We've got to find every possible source to share, to collaboratively work to make sure that this economy, this society, this culture continues. Perhaps not quite as lavishly as it has in the past. I think the days, Paul said, the days of cheap water. I think the days of lush lawns, the days of unlimited golf courses as opposed to target golf. I'm not here to advocate the elimination of golf, but I think it has done a good job, actually. If you look at that industry, it's tried very hard to live within a much skinnier diet. We all have to. And and we have to have new supply. I mean, we can't conserve our way out of this problem. That'll help, but it's not going to find the final answer. And so talking with the ag people, changing their diet of crops. Many of us could get off on the fact that alfalfa probably isn't the best crop to grow in Arizona, especially if you're going to export most of it to China and Saudi Arabia. I know that's subject to some fierce debate, but frankly, it's one of the most water intensive crops out there. Let's discuss that. Let's discuss cotton. We don't eat a lot of cotton in Arizona, and most of it, in fact, all of it in this country is exported. So it's the most heavily subsidized of all of the crops that are grown, to my understanding. And I think we need to have a serious discussion about whether we should continue to grow a lot of cotton. Pima staple is famous throughout the world, and justifiably so. But can we afford one of the most water consuming crops out there indefinitely? And I think the answer has got to be no. So you can have agriculture, but let's be very careful to say, we're not talking about taking away Yuma's lettuce or melons. They're very profitable and they're needed by the entire country. But there are marginal crops that we could probably look at very hard and say, really, wouldn't you rather have that water go to the cities? And I think the farmers would agree.
Thank you, Terry. Very informative.
I mean, the challenge, and I'm so glad you're talking about it, Paul and Bob, it is people have been very slow to see what is in front of us. And it was always there. It's just this year of exceptional drought has made it far more urgent than it would have been otherwise. And we got through the last 2 years because a 3-year agreement was basically purchased by the Biden administration in order to get the states together. And it didn't work because the carrot was there, but I'm afraid the stick wasn't. And it needed to be, and everybody needs to be brought to the table. And you asked about the Upper Basin, Paul. They really have been the prototype of non-responsive negotiators. We in the Lower Basin have put proposal after proposal on the table in the last several years, and the answer has always been the same. Nope, we're not going to do that. We're not going to give you a single drop of water. And even in the most urgent drought, we believe that it all needs to be us. And in fact, we ought to be able to expand our water use in the Upper Basin. And I find that totally irresponsible.
Terry, you and I have been friends, competitors, and friends again. I am really glad and happy and appreciative that you're working on this. I love the old saying that whiskey is for drinking and water is for fighting. That certainly is going to hold true here. I can see where you have 1,000 potential enemies on this one, everything from Upper Basin states, Department of Reclamation, what's going to happen between agriculture and golf courses and car washes and everything else. But I'm sure that there's no better person fit to be able to deal with that. I want to point out my appreciation for something that you said here. I caught it. Probably many people in the audience won't. You were complimentary of our Republican leadership in Congress. I'm not a Republican, never have been. I was a Democrat that became an independent. But I think that's exactly the type of bipartisan leadership this issue needs. It needs to try to figure out a way to pull people together and to recognize maybe one other euphemism. If we don't figure out how to hang together, we may hang separately. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben Franklin. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Terry. Bob, thanks for being on. We appreciate it.
Yeah. Good to see you.
I genuinely appreciate you doing this. I think it was very helpful.
And we stand today on the edge of a new frontier, the frontier of unknown opportunities and perils. It holds out the promise of more sacrifice instead of more security. The new frontier is here.
You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness.